Warning. The following podcast features views and opinions that are likely to trigger the extreme fanboys and fangirls who disagree with them. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome, everybody, to the Season 3 finale of Hot Takes with Billy Biz. It's been a crazy season. A lot has happened. We started this season in quarantine, and we're ending it in quarantine. A lot going on in the world, but it's been nice little break to come here and talk about movies for an hour or so every week. So thank you so much for tuning in. Today, we're doing something I've never done before on the show. I have two guests, two, in my opinion, Superman experts, and we're talking 2013's Man of Steel. My first guest, you know him from Reboot It and the Nerd Goat podcast. He's also got a very exciting Kickstarter that he can tell you all about coming up, Mr. Producer Bill.
Hey,
Mr. Producer, I like that.
Mr. Producer, very official. I appreciate that. Appreciate the respect you're putting on my name.
Mr. Producer. So yeah, you obviously people know us and our chemistry together from the Rebooted show, but you've got some comic book stuff coming out, right?
Yeah, it's cool. So Ed Greer, who's my co-host on Rebooted and who I produce for on Nerd Goat, is also sort of an erstwhile cartoonist. I have been a television producer for about 10 years, but ever since I was a kid, I've been an artist. And so Ed and I, for a while, have just been kicking around the idea of trying to do a comics project, and now we're doing it. So the Kickstarter was announced earlier in the week, but we're going to be doing a graphic album. So it's not, a full graphic novel, and it's not just the first issue of some indeterminate amount of issues. It's a one-shot deal that we're putting together in tandem. If you want more information, go check out either the Nerd Goat podcast or Reboot It on YouTube.
Very cool. And you are such a huge Superman fan, so I had to have you on this time, but I also had to have on... I'm such a huge fan of this guy. He's a New York Times bestseller, Eisner winner for Love is Love. He's also written a lot for DC, including Supergirl. Mr. Marc Andreyko, thanks for coming on the show, man.
My pleasure. My pleasure. How's everybody doing?
We're hanging in there. Mm-hmm. I think everybody's...
Yeah, I think when you said we started in quarantine and we're finishing this season in quarantine, and next season we'll also be in quarantine, because driving around Los Angeles and seeing all these dicks at restaurants and no masks, it's like ignoring a virus won't make it go away.
It's been so wild. Like just the past week or so, suddenly there was like another crisis in the world. So that crisis, everybody just forgot about. It is very weird.
Well, we have no attention span. And although I will say this, Donald Trump has finally said a policy statement that I agree with 100%. He said no masks and no social distancing at the Republican National Convention. And I support that 100%.
Co-signed 100%. Yes.
If only the virus killed assholes.
Well, it sounds like the one thing that maybe we could all agree on is we could really use a Superman in this day and age.
Lex Luthor. We got stupid Lex Luthor, so we can certainly use Spider-Man.
So we're looking back at 2013's Man of Steel, but, I don't think you can really do that. I actually don't think that you can really look at really any Superman live action, whether it be Smallville or Lois and Clark or Superman Returns. You can't really look at any of those without looking back at Richard Donner's Superman movie as well. And I just kind of want to gauge a little bit, starting with you, Mr. Producer Bill. As I'm looking at you right now, you even have that classic "You'll Believe a Man Can Fly" poster in the background. What's kind of your history with Superman?
So Superman the movie, Richard Donner's Superman, is one of my top 5 movies of all time. Superman as a character is honestly one of my earliest memories in life. You've probably heard me talk about this if you've heard me on other podcasts, but like literally one of my first memories is the Fleischer Studios animated Superman flying up into the death ray, punching energy balls to get to the mad scientist on the top of the hill. So I have loved Superman as far back as I can remember. But when I first got into comics, I, like most people, thought he was super lame. And so I sort of had this long road of reconciling sort of what Superman means to comics, what Superman means to pop culture, and then ultimately like what Superman means to storytelling. And the super brief version is like, when I got to college, for whatever reason, and I haven't done this self-analysis, I started to internalize the way I thought about stories and storytelling through Superman, because I feel like his story is such a compelling and sort of platonic version of the monomyth that he's just a character that I think that's why he endures. I think there's a lot of valid criticisms of the character, but for me, he is so vital because it's a distillation of like this primal thing in humanity of this need for somebody who can make it all okay. So I love the character, and yeah, I love Richard Donner's Superman. I, again, came to it late in life, didn't really start to appreciate it until I was probably in high school, but since, it has become one of my favorite movies.
What about you, Marc, as being part of the bigger DC family? Where does kind of Superman fit into everything for you?
Well, Superman the movie is, you can't overstate its importance, either as a comic book movie, as a blockbuster, as a sort of back in the day adaptation of source material that was actually respectful to the source material. But you got to remember, before the Superman movie, there was the Batman TV show and Wonder Woman, the TV show, which was fun, but also campy, and the Hulk, which was not really the Hulk per se. It was much more of a tone poem about, there were lots of villains and stuff. So this was the first time, and having Marlon Brando, an actor of that repute, in a superhero movie, the cast was crazy. I mean, and you're probably, neither one of you is probably old enough to remember this or were born at the time, but Marlon Brando got top billing. Christopher Reeve got third billing. It was Brando, Hackman, Christopher Reeve. Mm-hmm. And of course the Christopher Reeve performance is just such an underrated actor. If his Superman came out today, he would absolutely have been Oscar nominated. Because, the thing, when you're playing Superman, you're not just playing 5 characters. You're playing Superman the hero, Superman when he's with Lois, Clark with his family, Clark when he's with Lois, and who is he when he's neither? Who is he when he's at home watching TV by himself? And that's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff to play there. It's very easy to disregard superhero stuff or genre as, it's just fantasy. I'm like, well, anytime you have a scripted story, that's fantasy. It's not real. But it's great. I saw it in a theater. It's one of the first movies I ever remember seeing when I was like 7 years old. And it's a long movie, and I sat there for the 2.5 hours just mesmerized. That being said, even then, I had a couple of problems with the movie. I've never understood the need for comedic villains. I always even as a kid, I'm like, I don't want them pratfalling. I think the most effective moment for me of Lex Luthor that shows the villainy is when Lex shoots the missiles and he goes, one's going to California and one's going to Hackensack, New Jersey. And Miss Tessmacher, another underrated performance by Valerie Perrine.
Yeah.
But Lex, my mother lives in Hackensack. He looks at his watch and he goes, and it's so chilling.
I love the callousness of that.
So it's so cold and so chilling. And no one could have the look of white guy superiority better than Gene Hackman. He just had that look of like that teacher in high school that just decided they didn't like you for no reason and are just the most passive-aggressive dickheads there are. He's fantastic in it. I wish he had been allowed to play it darker because I feel a lot of times like he and Otis play similar beats and Hackman just has an intelligence to him that elevates those movies. But I want a villain. I want a bad guy. And I think that's why Superman 2 works so well, because you've got the 3 Kryptonian villains. But yeah, I mean, it's an important movie. It's a great movie. That performance is great. Margot Kidder, we would never cast an actress like Margot Kidder today in that role because she is not pretty enough. But I thought she was fantastic. That sort of ballsy, broad, 40s sort of Rosalind Russell performance. Once again, I think all the moving parts really worked well on the first 2 movies, and my complaints are minor in comparison to what those movies did and continue to do and continue to inspire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny because more than any other kind of original take on something that I can think of, Superman was so shaped by that Richard Donner. Like, you think about the aesthetics of Krypton and kind of like this crystal ice looking thing.
More importantly, it's shaped by the best piece of music John Williams ever wrote, which is the Super. I feel the emotion and the patriotism that you're supposed to feel when you hear the national anthem when I hear the Superman theme. It is a complete meal of music, and it is, of all the great stuff that John Williams has made, it's the one piece I would take to a desert island.
And it's that one piece of music too that I feel like is so synonymous with the character that even, like we said, other interpretations of Superman, you think about Smallville, you know, they weaved in kind of the Donner-esque aspects of it. So when you talk about trying to reinvent Superman for a new generation, you go to 2006 and we have Superman Returns, and there was kind of this almost this fear to jump off in a new direction. It was kind of a quasi reboot of what had come before it. And people just weren't having it anymore. They wanted something new. They wanted something different from Superman. So now we get to 2013 and, you know, this idea of cinematic universes and all these heroes and playing in the same sandbox is now a reality thanks to Marvel and the Avengers. So we get the first chapter in what they would lovingly call the DCEU. And I remember going into that movie and I was so hyped just because it was the first time that I felt like Superman was going to be able to, like, the technology had caught up enough that maybe we would finally see Superman doing some super things. So I kind of want to ask you guys how you felt that June of 2013, you know, with the hype of this movie starting, going into it with, by the way, Christopher Nolan's name plastered all over the marketing.
I was going to say that, Billy. I think that that's the one piece of this that, you know, you're doing a disservice if you don't remember it. I mean, this was very much a Chris Nolan project. And this was literally the year after The Dark Knight Rises had come out, made $1 billion. For as much as, you know, it didn't get the universal praise of The Dark Knight, it was still an absolute juggernaut of a movie. And Christopher Nolan was also riding high still off of Inception. At this point, I think Interstellar had been announced, but it's like he was, bar none, the biggest thing going in Hollywood. And the idea that, like, all right, he's going to make this lateral move from Batman over to Superman, for me, that was the most exciting part of the whole thing, was like, let's take a guy who, in my opinion, understands how to put a very almost mythic story together in a way that lands, and let's let him loose on Superman. I mean, that was what I was jazzed about. That's what excited me at the time.
What about you,
I'm
Marc?
the other end of the spectrum. I am thrilled that Christopher Nolan was a producer in name only on that movie.
Interesting.
I think Chris Nolan is great at lots of things. I think human emotion and clear action sequences are number one and number two on those lists of things that he's not good at.
I'll co-sign the action sequences, but I feel like he's underrated for emotion. I really do. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I do.
I'm not trying to be confrontational here, but all of his movies just feel like chess pieces being moved around on a board. And, you know, the Batman movies, I think, work the best because you have a caliber of talent there. But most of his movies feel like math problems. And he's really good at what he does. Superman needs to be more man than super, and I don't think that if Nolan was more hands-on, I think it would have been, I'm a weird alien who's trying to fit in, and he'd be vaguely on the spectrum in some very sort of clinical version of this.
I don't know if that's
so I'm glad Nolan's not doing it.
Well, let me just jump on that for a second, because I do think that Superman, bar none, is the most humanist superhero. And I think you absolutely need a filmmaker who has that humanistic touch, who understands.
Oh, so yeah, that's why I said I don't like Chris.
Well,
I didn't like Chris Nolan.
We could get into that. We can get into that debate,
touch.
But this is going to be a 3-hour podcast. What I'll say though is on the other side of the equation, then Zack Snyder concerned me from the beginning, because I think if you look at his filmography up to this point, he was the polar opposite of humanistic. I mean, he was a guy who had made his career on Durmstrang. You know, he was a guy who was trying to make a Teutonic myth every time he made a movie. And I think just some of the times that works better than others. 300, it works phenomenal. You know, that Sucker Punch movie, which was supposed to be about mental illness, not so much, but yeah.
Well, Sucker Punch, the tagline for Sucker Punch should have been, "It's everything meets everything," and not satisfying in any way whatsoever. No, I by all means don't think that Zack Snyder is a perfect filmmaker. But going back to what you were saying, the thing that I think, he's not a humanistic filmmaker per se. He is a mythic filmmaker. And what works for me in Man of Steel is you have Diane Lane and Kevin Costner and Laurence Fishburne. You have this bedrock cast of earthy actors who bring, and it felt like that Snyder actually did his research and was trying to channel, Terrence Malick in a lot of that stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, some of the stuff in the movie is really beautiful. And Henry Cavill, once again, brings up to me the Jesus of Scorsese's Last Temptation of Christ. He's this guy that finds out all this stuff and is like, wait a minute, I'm 25 years old. I don't know my ass from my elbow if I'm a human. And now I have this. What? I liked that. Now, that's not necessarily uplifting and happy, but I think a lot of people who complain about Superman talk out of both sides of their mouth. Like, he's not relatable because he can push planets, or he's too much of a goody-goody. And then when you bring some doubt and some angst to him, people are like, well, no, he's just moody like Batman. And I don't think it's either or. I think you can have both. And I think there are moments in it, and this could be the actors bringing this, but I think there are moments where the human connection between the characters is really, really so subtle and so underplayed that it's easy to overlook. Like when, there's just so much of it. The whole thing with Lois Lane when he's like, I'm just keeping these on because it makes them feel better. And the gum in the pocket and what does the S stand for? Does it stand for? And then the alarm goes off. When you have actors of that caliber who can play almost anything, they can play anything.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think that is one of Man of Steel's great strengths, is the cast and the way that they are able to make those small moments land in a way that feels both authentic and also, grounds what is otherwise a very mythic movie. That said, I mean, I think this is something I might keep coming back to as we're talking about Man of Steel. I never feel like those moments add up to the forest. I see the trees, and the trees are lovely, and I just never feel like they coalesce into any sort of statement or something with a perspective that gets me excited, or even on a fundamental level, like communicates what Superman stands for. And I think, Billy, not to do your job, but like for me, there's almost two things to talk about with Man of Steel. Is like, number one, is it the Superman that you like? And for me, it's not, but that's fine. And then number two, does it succeed on its own terms? And for me, I don't know that it really does, because again, for all the great moments, for all the stuff that does give you that little tingle, I don't walk out of that movie with any sort of message or feeling about the world that I feel like it wants me to. I don't know. That's a big statement, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, I am completely the other end of the spectrum on that. I think, and stuff that shouldn't work, stuff that would make me on paper roll my eyes and groan, works in this movie. When Clark shows up at the end of the Daily Planet and they say, "Welcome to the planet." Oh, that works on every conceivable. That shouldn't work. That is such a hack line on paper, but the way it's delivered, I just had the biggest smile on my face. And I think that's part of the problem with the DCEU and with the Zack Snyder movies in specific. We didn't get publicized his plan. So, and what he did, and you can argue the efficacy of this, but what he did was started out with a world that was in a dark place that had our Savior, who sacrificed himself to save us, even after he was blamed for lots of things, who then his death inspires the other metahumans to come out. And when he's resurrected, we're not being subtle here, the world is having a renaissance. The Man of Steel, I think, depended on you having affection for Superman beforehand and filling in a lot of gaps in his history that are there. Because as nerds, we can go to a movie and fill in the scenes that aren't there. And, I always say I have a director's cut in my head that I forget sometimes that other people don't hear.
Sure.
And I think that Zack started from a place of darkness, and I get it, and I know why it didn't work. But for me, the stuff that works really, really, really works, and the stuff that doesn't work, in my mind, I know what the missing connective tissue is. So my viewing of it is a lot different from someone this is their first time seeing a Superman movie.
So I want to talk a little bit. Let's start to get a little bit more granular, and I think where you have to start in this movie is the casting of Clark / Superman is incredibly tough. I mean, there's a lot of roles in cinema that are iconic. You know, I think of James Bond, where it's like everyone has their Bond, everyone has their Batman. But with Superman, it's almost unequivocally for years and years and years, even when other people stood in for the role on different TV shows or whatnot, it was always, well, Superman is Christopher Reeves.
Yeah.
So now you have this reboot, and the toughest challenge is not only how do you find someone that embodies the look and the feel and the charisma of Superman, but it's like, how do you do a new take on that? And I actually really love what they do in Man of Steel. You know, we talked about it a little bit, where I love that he kind of doesn't become that version of Clark Kent. He doesn't really ever become bumbling, and he really doesn't even become Clark Kent as we know him as like the reporter really at all in this movie.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I think it's part of the reason why people have issues with the climax of the movie and the whole General Zod death thing, because it's Superman first day on the job. I mean, we are seeing him learn on the job. And when Zod is presented as a being that was bred to be a strategic warrior, that's crazy. You know, that's like being told you're going to be playing tennis against Martina Navratilova when you're 6 years old. Okay, how does that work? So I also do really like the casting of Henry Cavill. I mean, it's well known my deep physical attraction to him, because I think he is one of the best looking human beings that has ever been birthed. But I do like the fact that instead of trying to do Christopher Reeve, Brandon Routh, the lanky sort of 70s guy, they went the Kurt Swan, Wayne man. He is a Superman. And, you know, I think that he brings a lot of subtlety to it. I wish he would have a script that was worthy of the performance commitment that he has, because I think with the few exceptions of a couple of scenes in Justice League where he smiles and you're like, oh my God, why aren't we letting him smile? Why isn't he rescuing cats? Why isn't he, you know, saving a boatload of nuns and the good human stuff that Superman does? But hopefully the fact that we've heard that Cavill is going to be popping up again, hopefully he'll get a chance to get the movie that he deserves. That you know, a really, you know, I would love to see Robert Zemeckis do one.
That was always my.
I'd love to see Howard do a Superman movie. I think those two guys get it. You know, I've just been revisiting The Matrix during the quarantine, and for all the complaints of part transgender experience, and boy, oh boy, oh boy, they're good. So I would love to see them, because they do Superman a little in those Matrix movies, you know. And say what you will about if you like their movies or not, but they know how to shoot action scenes. Look at that scene in Jupiter Ascending with him flying through Chicago and at night. You know exactly where you are at all times. It's visceral. So I would see some of these directors who could bring a brightness to it, because I think we've earned that as audience members, and Cavill has earned that as paying his dues in the trenches. I have no opinions on anything, by the way.
I'm trying to decide what to respond to first. I almost want to jump on that Wachowski's idea. But anyway, no, I mean, Henry Cavill, I think, looks the part unbelievably. I mean, and I'll just say this. I've always been a fan of him for Superman. I remember in the Superman Returns days, I was a younger man and I was very active on message boards, and like I got super into that whole casting. And I thought Henry Cavill should have been casted in that movie. You know, I was never a fan of Brandon Routh going into Superman Returns. And so I couldn't have been more happy, and I couldn't have been more happy to see his physical commitment to just getting super jacked and like looking the part of that Wayne boring, maybe in a different way than Marc, but like that really appealed to me, because yeah, he was trying to make himself look like he stepped out of the most iconic sort of Kurt Swan version of Superman. And
go ahead. We've seen that he's a big nerd.
Oh yeah.
And he was a fat kid growing up. So, lots of psychiatrists and psychologists say you think of yourself when you're like 11 or 12, that's who you think of yourself as an adult. So because he's so fantastically good looking now, but still thinks of himself as the fat kid and he's a nerd, there's a humanity there. There's a shyness and a likability factor that is counterintuitive to someone who's that physically attractive that I think is really, it just really works really, really well. Like, to just say the same thing over and over again. I would really like him to get a chance to have a script and a director that can really lean into Superman who loves being the shepherd of the flock of human beings. I think that there's something great there.
Well, so here's where my hot takes come in, because I would agree with you that Henry Cavill has a vulnerability that is believable. I see that. The thing that I would disagree with is I think that there is something inherently kind of, I don't know how else to put it other than dark. I feel like I never buy a wholesomeness, like a strong-jawed wholesomeness from him that I do buy, say, in Chris Evans as Captain America. I feel like every time Henry Cavill puts on a look of determination, it looks like he's angry. Every time Henry Cavill puts on, a look of thoughtfulness, he looks like a wounded puppy. And every time Henry Cavill smiles, like, there are moments in these movies, and I don't mean to come down too hard because he seems like a nice enough guy, but there's a moment in Justice League where him and Lois are on the farm in front of the corn, and she says something to him, and he looks back at her and flashes this big toothy grin and is just like, "Yes, ma'am." And I swear to God, it looked like he could have killed her in that moment. There's just like an inherent, there's something menacing about him. I don't know what it is, but I think
how women look who have Botox and they can't move their lips. He had the CG version of that in that scene.
He does the same thing with Martha, though, in Man of Steel, where she says something and he tries to flash her like a big, toothy, reassuring smile. And you want it to be that cheesy Superman smile, because we all know Superman has the cheesy, toothy smile. And when Henry Cavill does it, man, it looks like he might be thinking about murdering you. There's something shark-like to that guy that I think works incredibly well in a role like The Witcher, and even in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., where he's a little bit smarmy, he's a little bit conniving. Certainly in Mission Impossible Fallout, I thought he absolutely owned that movie. That's always been something I'm uncomfortable about with him as Superman, though, is like, I always feel like that wholesomeness, again, the vulnerability is there, but the wholesomeness feels like a put on to me. And I think it's just sort of an inherent quality as an actor.
I don't think it's an inherent thing with him as an actor. I think it's the scripts.
That could be too. I look
him. I mean, because look, just rewatch the one good reshot sequence in Justice League, the Flash and Superman at the end doing that race. Just watch that scene again. Watch the interaction between them. Watch the big brother kind of paternal thing with the Flash. He has it within him. He has just not, I think, been given a script that allows him to do that. And I would agree that sometimes some of the stuff is like teeth grittingly smiling and stuff. Once again, in the context of Man of Steel, hey mom, my surviving the people of my race are coming to destroy the planet. I'll be right back. There's an explanation for that, because it would be very weird if he's like, hey mom, let's have cornbread and milk the cows while Metropolis is being destroyed. So I think yes, I agree with your point, but I don't think that's a deficiency from him as a performer from what we've seen before. And I think, like I said, I think that it would be unfair if he had to drop out the role and they would cast it yet again, because I think, give him a fair shot. He has earned the right to have a Superman movie, not an origin movie, a movie of the future, City of Tomorrow sort of thing.
I also think, like I said earlier, like a lot of our conceptions of how Superman should be, how he should look, how he should act, I do feel draw heavily from that Donner movie, because to me, like, one of my first things that I really loved about Superman, or one of my first like really digging into it, was actually Superman the animated series. I really loved that show, and that was a Superman who always looks like he was in a lot of distress. One thing that they did with that version of Superman was they like specifically kind of depowered him a little bit. He would get his ass kicked a lot. He could just take it and get back up.
And Tim Daly's voice the whole time was like,
yeah,
right. He's not a super smiley, type of Superman. So that's why I say, like, I actually think that version of Superman is closer to Man of Steel's kind of take on Superman, which is a little bit more familiar with me.
I think there's a point to be made, though, Billy, that yes, the Christopher Reeve Superman was hugely influential in terms of like, this is what Superman should be like. But I also think that the performance and the writing in that movie were drawing from an era of Superman in comics that got the character most right out of any other. And also, I think for the first time, sort of codified what the character is and means. Those 70s Superman comics, largely written by Elliot S. Maggin, that is a treatise on the entire concept of Superman. And I don't know that it's ever been done better, frankly. I mean, and that is the direct inspiration for what happens in that movie and who Superman is in that movie.
I would argue that the Clark and Lois stuff in the Donner Superman is far more inspired by the Rock Hudson, Doris Day pictures,
sure,
or Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell, because you look at Pillow Talk and That Touch of Mink and stuff like that, and in all of them, Rock Hudson's this guy who is romancing this woman, and he's got this secret. He's pretending to be gay in these movies, and in Superman, he's you're having a three-way with me and myself, which is also very weird. And I think that because so many of us were so imprinted by the Superman movie, because there was nothing like it out there, and it is so good, that it was hard for us to remove that and allow. And I don't think Superman's is as readily reimaginable as, say, a Batman is. I think Batman is lightning in a bottle. I don't think anyone could have foreseen that you could do a Batman set in vaudeville, or a Batman set on Mars, or a Batman set on roller skates, and they all work. But I do think that I am glad that they went a different direction with the Snyder one, because we just, the biggest problem with Superman Returns is nothing happens. There's
Agreed.
so many pieces in it there are so many pieces in it that work beautifully. I think Brandon Routh does not get enough credit, because he's doing a Chris Reeve riff, but it's not an impersonation so much. It's more performance. Now, that being said, do I think he's Meryl Streep? No, but I do think a lot of heavy lifting was put on his back. But I mean, Superman Returns, the best thing about Superman Returns for me is they reuse John Hughes music with John Ottman's score, because otherwise he's a deadbeat dad. And once again, it's about real estate. Oh, that's exciting. It's like, is it the taxes and the Star Wars prequels weren't interesting enough,
I feel like this conversation is circling sort of a big statement. And that, I think where the take on Superman collides with the version of the movie is in the character's motivation. And this goes back to what you were saying, Marc, about how Batman is so adaptable. And I've always thought that the reason Batman is so adaptable is because no matter what setting, no matter what tone, no matter what's around him, you absolutely understand why he's doing what he's doing. And that's so fundamental to who he is. Yeah. You can literally put him in any context.
He's Hamlet.
Yeah.
I mean, the through line there is crazy how much that's Hamlet. Whereas Superman is the creation myth. It's Gilgamesh.
Well, and
it's Jesus. It's Moses. It's this. Superman is a guy who's destined to help us. Batman is a guy who decides to help us. I think that's the inherent difference of the.
I don't know, man. I would quibble with that only in so much as, like, yes, Superman is never going to be anything other than a savior figure. And I think if you lose that, you lose Superman. That said, I think you can tell the story where it is still an active decision. And I think that comes down to, though, what is the thing that drives him? And with Batman, it's so clear. With Spider-Man, it's so clear. I had this trauma happen, and this is a story about how I take that and use it to become something better and to serve people. And I don't think a good Superman movie needs that. In fact, I think if you try to foist that on Superman, it makes him something that he shouldn't be. However, I think in the absence of that, you got to do a lot more heavy lifting into the why. And I think one of the things that the Richard Donner movie gets so right is that Superman is an allegory for basically just growing up into adulthood. And his motivation is really nothing more complicated than just his perspective on the world. And I don't know I don't know how clear I'm going to be when I explain this, but I feel like you look at that Donner movie and it's trying to turn just the process of growing up into a myth. And it's all centered on a lot of the same stuff that Man of Steel is centered on. It's all centered on like, how can I be who I am most fully? And how can I use what I can do in a way that's meaningful? And I think that where Donner gets it right is all of that is very inward driven from his version of Clark. I mean, from the moment on the farm, he's this restless kid who's like, I want to do something bigger and better. And his father dies, and it becomes that very sober, somber moment of like, I have to go now because what I'm looking for is not here for me. And he's even in being somewhat of a wanderer, he's very much a driven character. And I feel like Man of Steel drops the ball on that. I never feel like that version of Clark. Yes, he's always trying to help people, but I never get that it's coming from this place of like, I can see the world so differently. I can do things that are so meaningful. I need fulfillment. I feel like the Donner Superman very much came from that place of like, I need fulfillment as a man. I feel like the Zack Snyder Superman is coming from this place of like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, and it really bothers me. Somebody tell me, and it sort of gets foisted on him. If you understand the distinction.
I see your point of view, but I really think that both movies work in different ways, in the sense that in the 70s, a superhero movie was never going to explore really dark, real stuff. Even the Donner movie has a sort of 50s gloss to it, in the sense that even the dark stuff, even the Miss Tessmacher's mom dying, even Lois getting crushed in the dirt is reversed. It's a much more fun movie than Man of Steel.
It's a fairy tale.
But I do think that Man of Steel is, once again, I'll go back to Last Temptation of Christ. It's this guy finding this thing out that is terrifying. If you found out you had all those powers when you were 12 years old, being 12 is hard enough. And to suddenly have these powers and have to guard everything you do, you can't, when you touch someone, every single gesture has to be thought out more than the average person. I mean, that scene with him in the hiding in the lock in the closet, yeah, I think is the heart and soul of the movie.
And that's my least favorite scene.
That being said, taste is not an arbiter of quality.
Fair.
And that's not an insult to you. There are things that I don't like that are incredibly well made. They just don't work for me. But for me, I like the humanistic quality. I like this is a guy who's like, oh shit, who am I? What do I have to do? And he works his way up to that. I don't think he's looking for someone to tell him what to do. He's trying to find himself. And I think that works because we all do that. When I've always said you go through a second puberty when you're in your 20s, you go through an emotional puberty, sure, where the world says, guess what? You're responsible for the decisions you make now. And that's terrifying. So I think it works. And I think he gets to the place where you want him to be with that last line, welcome to the planet. I think, boom. I think it drives me crazy that we didn't have the big happy sequel, the big Superman in Metropolis, everybody loves him, nodding the hat, sort of Our Town stuff right after that, because I think the retrospective look at Man of Steel would be much more friendly if we had the sequel where it was part two of act two of the story, not just a sequel. If that makes sense.
Oh, it makes total sense. It's just so wild though, because I don't think that was ever in the cards. I mean, Zack Snyder still did make Batman vs Superman, and I would argue Batman vs Superman would have worked so much more wonderfully if there was that drastic difference in tone between Superman and Batman. And the reality is he made a Superman sequel. Yes, it had Batman in it, but his Superman was even darker, more dour, and more misunderstood than he was in Man of Steel, which I think does kind of tarnish Man of Steel in retrospect, to me.
Once again, he was putting obstacles there for the long game. Whether that was smart or whether that worked is something we could argue for the rest of time. It's
and
why
probably
I do
will.
Oh yeah,
of course. It's why I want to see the Snyder cut of Justice League.
Oh, same.
Because I would like to see where he was going with it. Because as much as I don't like Sucker Punch, and I do think his Dawn of the Dead is actually better than the Ramiro one.
Agreed.
I will go on record saying that. I think Watchmen, if it came out today, would be much better received.
I have huge problems with that movie. Can I?
That's legitimate, but
yeah,
we'll bring you both back for a Watchmen episode.
That'd be interesting. Billy, I don't want to hang us up, but one thing I did want to jump on. You know, Mark, you were talking about that scene with young Clark locked in the broom closet, where his powers are sort of overwhelming him. I love that as a concept. I love the setup of that. The thing I really dislike about that scene, and I think for me, and this gets into like, what is your version of Superman, and is this movie it? For me, the thing that kills that is Martha Kent, and the fact that she comes in and says her solution, you know, he's saying the world's too big, which is a little bit clunky dialogue, but her response is, then make it small, focus only on me. And for me, that is sort of antithetical to who Superman is. I mean, even at that young age, I would think the point you make with a Superman movie, because that ethos carries through the rest of Man of Steel. Make the world small, close yourself off, look inward. Don't let the world overwhelm you. To me, I think on the fundamental...
Those are four different statements you made.
I think they're all valid,
though. Those are not all synonyms, though.
I know they're not synonyms. I think they're all valid, though.
The make the world palatable, make the world be able to process, make the world smaller to filter out all the input is a lot different than close yourself off from the world.
But I think
those are two different things.
I agree, but I think that was the implication, and I think that you then see, I mean, through all the Kevin Costner stuff, which I know we want to get into, I think that you see that ethos carry through in the Kents through the rest of the movie. And to me, Superman's, Martha Kent's, the Kents, whatever, however you want to frame it, the response to the world is too big, the world is overwhelming me. For Superman, it is open yourself up to all of it. Let it all in.
He's 10 years old.
And again,
he's 10 years old.
But if that's something that the movie had him struggle with, I would be better with it. But I don't think throughout the movie...
That's his whole thing. That's why he goes and wanders the world, because he's struggling with trying to figure out who he is, because he has no one to talk to. He is the only person there. So I think this is a personal taste thing.
Sure.
I think her saying focus on me isn't close off the rest of the world. It's you're my child. I love you. I'm your mom. I'm going to protect you no matter what. Now, you could argue the effectiveness of them being, we care about you as our son more than we want you to go save the world because we love you. We want to protect you. You can argue whether or not you like that. For me, once again, I liked the flawed, rough around the edges. Yeah, you could probably save the world, but people might kill you, and you're our son. We want you to be. We'd rather have you here for Thanksgiving dinner than risk you being in a prison somewhere. Now, you could argue about that. That's completely fine. But I liked that. I liked that because the other end of the spectrum in Donner's, they're American Gothic. They're that painting. They're like out of central casting. You know, Ma's like making pies and putting them on the windowsill, and that's not an insult to that, but it's very Americana, and it's much less quote unquote real. I like the stuff, the humanity that Costner and Diane Lane bring. Now, once again, personal taste is different for everybody. I live in California where everyone eats avocados. I wouldn't cross the street for an avocado. That doesn't mean I don't think they should exist. But it's interesting, this conversation, because we both come from a place of deep and abiding love for this character. And it's interesting how what makes us us can make something work or can make something completely not work.
I want to move us ahead just because we are getting long in the tooth here. But I do want to talk about really, in my opinion, the best Superman villain that has ever been put up in live action with Michael Shannon's Zod. Now, this was another thing that was kind of the beginning of Man of Steel, all the sequence on Krypton is kind of a rehash of the same kind of opening of the Richard Donner Superman, which is Zod does something. In this one, we actually get to see kind of the coup, the insurrection, but he stands trial and gets put away into the Phantom Zone, which anytime that I watch either the Donner Superman or this Superman, I think, man, who on Krypton was not stupid enough to commit a capital offense to at least get off the planet before it exploded? No, but I love Michael Shannon because they did something. I just like this version of Zod. I think it's a little bit better of a motivation where he is like, I love that he's like, look, I know that sometimes I am mean and I'm cruel and I'm harsh and I know you don't understand, but this is what I'm programmed to do. I'm programmed to keep us alive. And I feel like he has such a clear motivation, but also, like I said, the technology caught up enough where we finally got to see Superman do something super, and he finally had a nemesis that could be super against him.
Well, I mean, Michael Shannon is the logical progression from Terrence Stamp. Terrence Stamp was great doing it if we did this, if Man of Steel came out back in 78, that's the performance Michael Shannon would have given, because that was the baseline then. But Michael Shannon's also so aggressively weird looking and his eyes are kind of weird. So when you get close up with him and he's talking and it's their spittle, you're like, holy shit, can I get the car, please? So he's never anything but fully committed to what he does. And like a good villain, you see his point to an extent. But when it begins eugenics, when it begins about, oh, I'm going to exterminate this race because my race is better and we need the space, then you're like, wait a minute, pull back, dude. You kind of wish that there was a moment where you could get him to sit down and talk with Bruce Wayne and Superman and say, hey, we'll give you Montana. But that's, once again, villains don't think they're villains. Villains are the heroes of their story. And there is a purity, even though it's demented, there's a purity to Zod's mission. He is doing what he's supposed to do. The joke is, it's like he's Sigourney Weaver in Galaxy Quest, where she's like, I talk to the computer. That's what I do. Let me do it. This is what Zod does. And creation comes from destruction. So, and he was made by Kal-El's father, probably had a part in him, his genetic makeup. So there's all sorts of really interesting stuff just percolating below the surface. And I do think, I do hope we'd have no more Kryptonian villains. Give me Brainiac. Same. Where's Mxyzptlk? Give me, I have a way to do a Superman sequel that would be fantastic. I just need to sell a couple of things so I can get that meeting. But I want more. I don't need to see the Green Goblin ever again. I don't need, so let's bring in some of the cooler villains. Bring in Toyman. I want to see Superman fighting a giant wooden soldier marching through, or bring in Titano. Bring in a 30-foot tall chimpanzee.
Yeah.
Why not? Lean into it.
I could not agree with that more. I think that Michael Shannon is by far the best part of Man of Steel. I think that he is a phenomenally talented actor and an intelligent actor. I mean, he understood every nuance of that performance and communicates it on screen in a way that's just so effective. I mean, I think it is it's a performance that elevates the rest of the movie because it's so good.
He's a zealot. He's playing a zealot.
Yeah,
he's amazing.
No, he's playing, and I think he's just that idea, right? Of I have literally a genetic certainty of my purpose in life. Like there is no question, there is no moral debate around this because this is my purpose. Like it's so infused to every line he delivers and every look he gives. I mean, and it is a weird thing to think about. And it makes me wish that the movie would have gotten, I feel like the movie has a hard time sort of picking a lane in terms of like its themes. But I think that there was one sitting there that they kind of tried to use of like, Zod, I have megalomaniacal genetic certainty of my purpose. Clark, I don't know what my purpose is or should be.
That brings up a really great point that I can't believe we didn't talk about earlier. The idea that on Krypton, you don't choose a career. Your career is chosen before you're born.
Yeah.
Right.
You are bred to serve. You are a worker ant in the colony. And that's there's a really great paper that I'm not smart enough to write talking about Clark, Kal-El, and Zod. What would Clark Kal-El have been if he grew up on Krypton? He probably would have been Zod.
Well, to be honest with you, I loved
fate versus predestination versus free will. Once again, we're getting biblical here. So
it's there in the setup. I just wish the movie would have done more with it. But I loved how Man of Steel started literally in childbirth, and then not the implication, but the explicit explanation that this was the first time, a woman had given birth naturally to a child without a genetic predisposition in centuries on Krypton. Again,
the reverse of a virgin birth.
Yeah, the setup there is wonderful, and conceptually on paper that works so well. And I feel like they just kind of let that sit and never pick it up again until the end of the movie, where Zod is like, my only purpose was my people, and now I have no people, which, by the way, is Michael Shannon just torching the screen. Love that moment. But again, I wish the intervening 100 minutes had addressed
a lot
that.
of the set.
Sorry, we talked over each other, I feel like.
Sorry.
That's okay. We'll pick it up clean. Yeah, no, I do love that, there's this kind of, it's borderline campiness. I don't think it ever quite reaches into camp with this performance, but I don't know. I just feel I love the commitment from Michael Shannon on this one.
Look at him. I mean, look at the people that are focused on their purpose, that sort of zealot terrorist look. I mean, he's Alex Jones with superpowers.
You know what, though? He's also a little bit Steve Jobs. I mean, I see a little bit of that in there, too.
Six of one, half dozen of the other. I mean, he's definitely that. And it's a performance that he brings so many levels to beyond just I'm Superman's villain.
Yes.
It's this guy. He'd be great. That character, Zod, could be in Doctor Strangelove, riding the missile. I mean, that character we've seen before. That character, Martin Sheen in the Dead Zone. That character who knows there's nothing scarier than someone who thinks they're smarter than they are and is 100% behind everything they do, because nothing will change their mind. That's interesting. And I think because that both emotionally and physically, he was this immovable object, and the Phantom Zone projector doesn't exist anymore. Superman had limited choices in front of him.
Oh, we're getting there. We're going there.
Let's just we're here. Let's just go for it. One of the biggest criticisms of this film is in the very end of the third act, where Superman is faced with a choice and ultimately chooses to basically say goodbye to any last remnants of Krypton by snapping Zod's neck out of, sheer desperation at that point. For me personally, I think the moment doesn't feel sacrilege or gross because of the reaction that he has afterwards. We watch him break the neck, but we watch his heart break at the same time, because whether the film says it directly or not, after that moment that Superman will never ever kill anything again because his hands are stained.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is where I'm going to be the argumentative jerk again. So look, I don't disagree with that, Billy. And frankly, on the movie's terms, I don't think that scene is bad. And I don't think that scene is gross, to use your words. I do think there's two things going on there, though. Number one, everybody in the audience knows Superman shouldn't be snapping necks. So I think, again, if you have any sort of respect for what your audience is carrying into the movie, it's something that needs to be addressed. And yes, he screams and he's in anguish, and you can absolutely tell from the performance that it has this really crazy effect on him. That said, this is also a movie that had never, up until that point, in any significant way, addressed the morality of killing. It had never given Clark a single word or look to even suggest what his stance was on killing anybody or anything. There's no setup. There's no nothing for you to compare or contrast that moment to. And so it just becomes, yes, it's suicide by cop and it's Zod forcing his hand. Get it? That said, the movie doesn't do any of the work of contextualizing the morality of that decision.
As opposed to Superman 2, where both Superman and Lois push the Kryptonian criminals who are now depowered into a crevasse and they die. And
I think that that's a well-taken point, and I'm actually not as big a fan of Superman 2 as I am of Superman the movie. But I think that it's also such a... And this is the other thing, too, that I think is sort of tangential to this conversation. Man of Steel is such a visceral movie. Like, the directorial choices that are being made are made to make you feel like in the moment, and to, things feel dangerous and heavy and threatening in a way that, like, they don't when people are being murdered by the dozen in the Avengers climax. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a different directorial style. And I think because it's so intimate, it's so hands-on, it is just such an intense moment. It deserved more. And again, it doesn't deserve more fallout even. I liked the reaction. I liked the crying. I liked, it tears him apart. I just wish there would have been just even a hint, anything to give you context for why that would be a hard decision. Even if they leaned into this idea of, like, he really did have a part of him that was holding out hope that he could hang on to a friend from his homeworld or a connection to his homeworld, and having to snap this guy's neck, you then understand becomes he's rejecting that possibility of ever happening. But again, the movie didn't set that up either. The movie doesn't hang that moment on anything. It just exists as like this weird short film from the moment they crash through the train station roof to the moment where Lois cradles him in a Pieta. Like, that is just an isolated segment that doesn't have to exist with anything else. And I feel like I get angry at it for that.
See, I can see that point of view, but for me, and once again, bringing my own stuff to it, bringing my own Catholicism to it, the idea of I think there is enough fallout. I think the idea, there's a couple of tropes in superheroes that have always bothered me. One is the secret identity trope, keeping it secret from everybody. Because I think if any of us had superpowers, we would tell either our best friend or our partner instantly. And the idea of not becomes a weird sort of gaslighting thing. Looking back at all these 50s superheroes, you're like, wait a minute, they were all monsters to their significant others.
Superman was a dick.
There's some Superman. Well, yeah, there's that whole collection
exactly.
of Superman as a dick. But for me, it was like a cop who kills someone on duty. It's never the first choice. Well, it shouldn't be, but in theory, it's never the first choice. And when he does that, and you're right, the close-up is right there. We're not on Zod's face when the neck snaps. We're on his. And when you hear that snap, you see something in him die. All good heroes are willing to sacrifice a part of themselves for the betterment of other people. And once again, you can argue if it works for you or not, but I liked the smallness of it. I liked that he was saving this family of three in this small thing, as opposed to lifting Metropolis out and chasing an atomic bomb. It showed for me that Superman, with his abilities and hearing and all that, was aware of everyone. And imagine that level of work, of always being on call. And for me, like I said, for me, it really worked. For me, I felt like this movie was a prequel to a Superman movie in a lot of ways, because at the end of it, for me, I was like, yes. The only thing that was really missing for me at the end of the Man of Steel is him and Lois out at dinner. He hears something, he gives her a kiss, and he flies away.
Sure. And
she just, she sits there and goes, "Can I get this to go?" Boom. And for me, I have enough history with Superman that I can fill those things in, which is, once again, every audience member brings their own history to a project, and it's up to you to figure out what are the things that really work and what are the things that are straws that snap the camel's back.
And I think it's tough. I think it's tough because I think this movie does end up relying on the audience to bring a lot of that into it. And what I've heard and can understand that argument, like, oh, that's the moment when he decides he will never kill again, and it's so fundamental to making him the Superman we love. I hear that, and I see how you can come to that conclusion. I just don't think the movie puts any effort into giving you that context. And I don't think that the neck snapping is an Act 3 problem. I think it's an Act 1 problem that goes back to, like, you never really know what any of these proceedings, all of the Durmanstrong, all of the action and the battles and the, Zod making these weird zealotous demands, you never really know what that means to Clark. And again, I just feel like I wish the movie would have given us that through line, would have given us that strong thematic anchor for, like, what does it mean when he snaps his neck at the end? Is that something fundamental? Does he because, like, look, I've read Miracle Monday. I get Elliot S. Maggin. He understands death in a way that no other human can, because when he experiences death, it is the cessation of him being able to watch everything in your body move and hear your blood flow and, like, just understand what life means. And when he takes a life, oh my God, it's so much more powerful because he understands it in a way that no other human can. But again, I'm bringing that into the movie. The movie didn't give me anything to indicate that. And that's what I think. I think that's a problem with that movie.
I would argue that the Pietà imagery does that without dialogue.
It's imagery, and, like, I mean, and you're saying he's sacrificing.
It's a movie. There's
I know, imagery, but it's a story too.
Is important.
It's a story too.
Yes, but you don't. But do you want him to sit down and say, "Well, I know I shouldn't kill, and I had to," and explain it directly on the nose?
No, I'm saying
I think
there needs to be a dramatic moment somewhere in the first half of the movie that dramatizes his feelings about killing or death, or what he wants out of reconnecting with Krypton, or what he hopes to get from Zod, or just, again, anything. I'm not saying, no, it's never an exposition, sit down and explain my feelings, but it's like, give me a moment to hang that ending on. Give me something to contrast it to. Give me something that gives it context.
I want to move us along, because I think whenever you talk about Superman, there's kind of three major components to any Superman, really, in my opinion, any Superman project ever. There's Clark and Superman. There's the villain that he's facing off against, and then there's Lois Lane. And I think, in terms of, you brought up the amazing performance by Margot Kidder back in the day, but this movie does something to me. It corrects this problem that I've always had with Lois for years and years and years, which is she is such an amazing reporter / detective that there's just no way that she wouldn't be able to put two and two together, that Clark and Superman are the same person. And I don't care how charming or how different that Clark is able to make himself look as Superman and Clark, she would just figure it out. She would. And this movie does, in my opinion, the very smart thing of completely sidestepping that by having her be there from the very beginning, having Clark actually be the story that she's chasing down, so that when he becomes Clark Kent, we don't have to do the whole charade. She's the one that at least in my mind, I have to think she's the one that probably got him that job at the Daily Planet.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I like that a lot too. I mean, I mentioned earlier the trope of secret identities. The thing I loved about the Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man was he gets his powers, and what does he do? He goes and tells his girlfriend. Lois is the best Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter on the planet Earth, and she doesn't know this because the guy trips sometimes. No, I wish we would have. I would like to see a Superman story where he is struggling to tell her. And she says, "Clark, I've known this whole time. Because as a gay man, let me say this.
That's essentially what the Lois and Clark when she proposes. That's exactly what she said.
Yeah, I mean, it's the metaphor of coming out there is so powerful, because when the idea of, oh, I want to tell you the secret to whether telling it to your parents, and then your parents are like, oh, we knew. Oh, okay, awesome. The idea of letting Clark tell her on his terms because she knows he has to is really cool. And I think it puts Lois in a position of, not only is she super smart, but she's super empathic and super, pun slightly intended, human. I think there's just something there about them that you're like, oh, I'm not a big believer in like soulmates and words like that. They're just too Oprah Winfrey for me.
Right.
But Lois is the person that Clark needs to be with, and Clark is the person Lois needs to be with. And the fact that this is from a comic book that's 80 years old and all this stuff has been, all these flavors have marinated in there, makes me kind of want to cry as a geek, because these stories have impact. These stories have meaning. These stories shape us. They give us a moral and ethical spine, in addition to being wish fulfillment, and inspire us to try and be better people, which is so important right now. I've been inside too long. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Wow, I'm getting emotional talking about Superman. But that's why I love talking about this with you guys, because all our points are valid, and it's not about I'm right, you're wrong. It's about we all love this stuff. And I love talking about stuff where we have different opinions, because it's an insight into the way other people think. And I'm glad you do shows like this, Billy, because debate has become such a thing where people take it so personally.
Right.
Where it's like, I like you guys. We might disagree on a movie. We might even yell at each other on this, but that's the argument. That has nothing to do with us. We are far more alike than we are different. And that's to be interesting. That's one of the things about this, the internet being for good, where we can talk about this stuff and start thinking about things, and hopefully think about things, about these projects we love, in ways that we didn't think of before because of something you said. I'm like, oh, yeah, I get that. That to me is the fun of this.
Wow, that was beautiful.
Yeah,
I don't even know how to follow that up.
I totally agree with that. It's funny that comes from that all was sparked by the idea of Lois and Clark being these soulmates, and it has persisted for 80 years. I could not agree with that more. And I get that same sort of emotional reaction to it because to me, like, this is the thing. I've always felt that it's inherent in the setup of Superman is this idea of a guy who, more than anything else, needs to help and needs to make the world a better place. And I think throughout his life, he encounters people who think that that's either impossible, stupid, unrealistic, not something that he can do. And in Lois Lane, he finds a person who not only thinks it's a valid way to spend your life, but who's more willing to do it than even he is. And like, as people, they become this representation of kind of what the other one wishes all of humanity could be. And it's like Lois, who spent her life around sort of like domineering assholes, finds someone who is the most sensitive and empathetic person. And Superman, who spends his life around compromisers and people who don't believe in the never-ending battle, finds someone who's out doing it almost more effectively than him without the powers. And it just becomes like they are the apotheosis of the other person's need in other people.
Oh, absolutely. And in this version of it, in the Man of Steel version, something that I think is pretty interesting is that Lois is is there. She wants him. She supports him to do this stuff. She is fully there. Whereas in the 50s with the secret identity stuff, he would hide stuff from people. And Lois, in the best form, would never tell him not to do this because she knows he has to. And she's also the opposite of his parents in a lot of ways. His parents are like, we want you to do this. It's your kid signing, Clark going to be a superhero is your kid signing up to join the army after 9/11 or we're going to go to Vietnam.
Sure.
You understand, you're proud of them for that moral thing, but also you don't want your kid to die. And Lois is there and she's like, oh, I see how you're wired. That's awesome. You inspire me to be a better person, so I'm going to be here for you. It's that connection. It's that tether to humanity that opens him up and allows him to be Superman and Superman, which I think is to me always interesting. It's the foibles and the doubts and the leaving the toilet seat up or whatever that make him interesting, not him shooting heat rays out of his eyes.
I can agree with that. Yeah, I think as it relates to Man of Steel, the only thing that disappointed me was I sort of felt like Lois had an underwritten arc, because I agree with you. It should be exactly what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
I just felt like I wish I would have gotten that journey with her of having to come to terms with who this guy is, and then what that does to her, and then what that means to the world, and then how she can best support him. And it's like she's just kind of conveniently around through the entire movie, and we never get into like what is driving her and what is any of this doing to her mentally or emotionally or whatever. And I feel like as a character she deserves that, and the movie really underserved it.
Well, yeah, she did a lot of heavy lifting just by being Amy Adams and being present.
Yes.
She brings so much, because I will say this, it's a recurring theme in DC movies. When they announce casting, a lot of time I go, oh, that person, whether it's Michael Keaton or Heath Ledger or even Amy Adams, I was like, I want my Lois to have brown hair. That was my nerdy thing. And just, she's so good. I was like, okay, she could be bald. I am fully on board. Yes, she needs more to do. I would love a movie with the two of them together. Open with them getting married, do a tribute to the Donner Part 2, have them go to Niagara Falls, do some lines there, show them really loving one another and show them loving this planet. I think if they play their cards right and have the right script and the right director, I think a sequel, a long delayed sequel to Man of Steel, could be exactly what we're going to need in about a year and a half.
So I just want to, as we start to kind of wrap things up, I just really quickly wanted to talk a little bit about, I rewatched, full disclosure for everybody, by the way. I think everybody pretty much knows at this point, but we had recorded this a while back and we weren't able to post it. It got corrupted. So we're doing this conversation again, which is actually great because I've now had time to kind of marinate with some of those thoughts and some of those things. And I actually was able to watch Man of Steel one more time before we did it a second time. And one of the performances that I always just kind of took for granted, but I really love in this movie, is Laurence Fishburne as Perry White. And he doesn't have a lot of screen time, but I actually, when I watched it, there's one moment in this movie that affects me every single time, and it hits right in the gut, which is when Jenny, who's one of the interns, everything around them is just foobar. Metropolis is falling apart and she's stuck, and he's trying to get her out, and he looks over at the world engine, and there's just, without saying a word, he's like, we're just not going to make it. And he drops what he's doing and he just gives her his hand. And it's the most human, the most beautiful moment really in a comic book movie that I can think of. And I don't know any other actor with just their eyes that could make that moment just crush you and give you hope at the same time.
What's great about you bringing that up is all the critics bring up, oh, there's so much destruction, there's no stakes. That moment is so beautiful. And talk about an actor at the top of his game. I mean, I'll watch him read the phone book, and he just brings this gravitas to it, and just that simple. And let's talk about contextualizing it in today, right now, June 11th, 2020. A black man reaching out to a white woman, completely empathetic, wanting to help her because he knows we're going to die, but we're not going to die alone. Just the level of metaphor that has by today's standards. I'm not going to cry a second time on your podcast because Jesus God. But I mean, there's stuff there. And it's because these movies aren't about that. It's not, here's the theme. When I write, I don't write with a theme. The theme comes out. I mean, I'm subconsciously writing with a theme because I've never liked didactic stuff. I don't like stuff telling you this is good for you. I like being able to come to that destination on my own. And I think there are moments, and once again, the movie doesn't necessarily completely gel, but there are so many beautiful moments like that. And for me, I would almost rather have a movie that has 5 or 6 beautiful moments than has a big, great third act. because I know that especially with characters like this, they're serialized. We're going to spend a lot of time with them in theory. That we'll get to places with them, and I had completely forgotten about that Perry White moment, and that was, thank you for bringing that up and reminding me of that, because that is a really, really sort of beautiful, sad, terrifying. It's really a powerful moment.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think Laurence Fishburne fits into the same category as we've been talking about with all the actors in this movie. Like, they bring a commitment and a nuance to what is an underwritten script that elevates everything that's going on. And I think that moment is a great example. That said, I hate this because I feel like I'm being super negative, but I feel like it is easy, if you focus on the beautiful moments in this movie, to come to the conclusion of, oh my God, this is a beautiful movie with so much great stuff in it. And I don't think it is. And so I keep finding myself like compelled to put this into context. And maybe that's the thing for me, that like, I am looking for this movie to hang together as a statement. And maybe I do just love more didactic type of storytelling than you do, Marc. But like,
that's, yeah, absolutely. That's completely valid, you know? And it's that's very frustrating sometimes, because I'm the same way, where there's movies where I'm like, why can't you be the movie I want you to be?
Yeah.
Right.
And especially when it feels like for you it's close so many times that's 100%. Even more frustrating than if it had been an utter and abject failure. Great.
Right.
But when it's
and I think that is what's frustrating. And I feel like I look at that moment, right, with Laurence Fishburne and Jenny and the world engine, and they're about to die. And what the function it's serving in the movie is that it's putting a human face on the struggle that Superman is having on the other side of the world. And I think that there's something kind of cynical about the way the movie does that, because at the end of the day, these are people that Superman has never met, that we know will go on to be important to him. But because of the way that the movie had to position its chess pieces, right? You go back to that idea of Christopher Nolan tells movies that are math formulas. For me, I felt like the movie was so concerned about putting Superman on the other side of the world so that it could give Christopher Maloney and Lois an important moment on this side of the world. But then, oh my God, Superman is like in the middle of nowhere with nobody to actually save. So we got to put a human face on it. So, okay, we'll do it with these two characters because we got nothing better to do with these two characters. It all just felt like cynically contrived to me, so in a way that was like filling in for Superman not saving anybody.
I understand what you're saying. I think I tend to, just as a human being, be more kind of like you, Marc, where I kind of see a movie or a story or a song or a book as kind of a tapestry of different things. And I'm not really like, yes, definitely I want a story that's cohesive and that makes sense to me. But, you know, if you play a note and that note hits an emotion for me, I'm much more of a emotional resonance than I am like, you know, Bill, you have such this great, like almost, I almost want to call it like a strategic mind, where my brain wouldn't even think in that moment, like, oh, well, this is actually just a stand-in because you can't see Superman saving a human on the other side of this. Like, my brain just doesn't go there. I'm strictly like, I'm probably too sensitive for my own good, and I'm a creature of feelings. So in that moment exists to me within an island that is this entire movie, where it's just like, I've been watching all of this action, but for just a minute, I really felt like a gut punch of like, I don't really know this girl, but I know that feeling. I know that feeling of being like, what would I do? And so I project my own emotions into it. And a lot of times, and I'm not saying this is right, I'm not even saying this is critical because I'm not a movie critic, but a lot of times I will judge something, or if something affects me based on an emotion, maybe I'll give it the whole thing a different pass just because it hit me differently, if that makes any sense. I don't know if I'm just rambling at this point, but
I think it makes total sense.
I see your point. For me, I think I go, once again, it's just so fascinating because it's like that blue dress, gold dress.
Oh, totally.
Going around.
That's what's happening here.
Which to me, I'm like, I never saw the black one. I don't know. I don't get it. But anyway, but for me, Superman being on the other side of the world and Christopher Maloney and Lois and Dr. Emil, what is his last name? Hamilton, thank you. I liked that because, as you said, he doesn't really know Perry White or Jenny Olsen yet. So if he had spun around and popped up through the earth and taken them out and popped them up and then gone back, that would have been a great Superman moment. But once again, this movie was, I think, going for what was shaping him and that sort of thing. And for me, the stakes of, I thought those world engines, that boom, 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 was like, I felt chaotic. I was on edge in the theater watching it with the sound design and all that.
It was aesthetically
I thought it was
awesome.
Great.
It was aesthetically and as an experience, it was awesome. So I'll cop to that.
And let's talk about possibly maybe there was intentional metaphor of Superman destroying that world engine by himself and then coming back and saving people. He was doing on the macro and the micro. There's all sorts of better film scholars than I am that can debate.
But I also think that moment illustrates kind of the mission statement of why Superman does what he does, because I think you have to have that, like, these humans in that moment show that they are worth saving. There is still good in this world that is left. It also, for me, even though it's not Superman that's learning this lesson, it's me as kind of a viewer, but it's like, it solidifies why Clark would choose these humans over potentially ending this world and starting all over. It's because there are people like Perry White that in the face of death are willing to put their hand out, Which
is awesome. I just real quick, my response to that is that's awesome. And I think that is intentional, Billy. And again, the problem for me is you never in this movie see Clark encounter, react to, have any sort of interaction with a sentiment like that. And that's so frustrating to me because, it's in there, but the main character, the guy whose journey it is, the guy who's supposed to be learning things and growing as a person, is so disconnected from the experience you have as a viewer. That's so weird to me, and it really bothers me.
Once again, I feel the opposite way, but how do you feel then about in Donner's movie that he lets Lois Lane die?
I love that. Okay, you're going to get me going now. I love that moment because...
Oh, no, I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm legitimately curious because
I love it.
As we're talking about this, there's a lot more in Superman the movie that is similar to Man of Steel than I remember.
For sure. But I think this is what's interesting, right? I think number one, I wasn't looking for Superman to tunnel through the earth or save, Perry and Jenny specifically. Again, it's my problem with that moment was like the setup leads to a conclusion that maybe doesn't land the way that it should. And that doesn't mean the conclusion should be different. It means the setup should be different. You know what I mean? So I can expand on that. But what I love about the Lois thing, so to me, again, the Richard Donner Superman movie is this big, grand, mythic allegory for the process of growing up. And I feel like he goes through all these stages, but it's all anchored on this idea of like, people do not know the me I am inside, right? And that starts with, we're all born into a world we never made. He's literally born onto a doomed world. Our parents try to do the best they can, but they never know who we really are. And then we have to move beyond our parents and discover our place in the world. But then we come up against all these jerks and assholes and people who don't understand us, and nobody really understands us. And then when you find that person that you feel like, oh my God, is getting me on some real level that nobody in my life ever has, Lois Lane, how devastating would it be to lose that person? And I love the fact, number one, that Superman chose the greater good over saving that person because the other missile was going to kill everybody.
But he does not choose the greater good.
But yes.
Miss Tessmacher says, you have to save my mother first. The choice is made for him.
But he makes the choice. She asks him to, and he makes the choice.
No. He makes a deal with her. But if she hadn't made that deal with him, New Jersey would be a wasteland. I guarantee it.
I don't know. And again, that's we can bring our interpretations into it. But here's the other part of it that I think is really interesting that stands in stark contrast to Man of Steel. Lois dies. He cannot save her for the second time in that movie, because now we saw how he wrestled with the death of his father. And even if it was just one line, right? It was all these powers and I couldn't even save him. And that motivates the rest of the movie. And he comes to that again. And he has such rage, and good God, that performance by Christopher Reeve, that scream he lets out. I'm sorry, Henry Cavill's scream has nothing on that scream. But then he flies into action. And there's two things happening in that moment. Number one, you think, oh, he's going to go kill Lex Luthor. And that thought never even crosses the character's mind that we can see, because it's not about revenge. It's about, I have to save everybody because that is my purpose. I'm not going to punish this guy. I am going to make things right. And then number two, Brando comes back and you get the voiceover in the clouds, and it's a super cheesy 70s effect, yes. But from a storytelling standpoint, the one lesson he had learned from his father, and again, none of our fathers understand us. That's sort of the whole metaphor of the whole thing. The one lesson he had learned is you will not interfere in human history. And he says, F you, Dad, I'm going to do it because I have made my choice. I am not the person you want me to be. I am the person that I choose to be. And so again, there's so many choices being made in those moments. Number one, I'm the greater good over Lois. Number two, not seeking revenge, seeking a better way to do it. Number three, doing the impossible, which Superman must do. And then number four, reconciling this entire journey he's been on of a person growing into the man he wants to be and making that one final choice. No, screw your rules, I'm doing it. Now, logically, it's weird and like it has a lot of weird implications, but as a dramatic moment, I love it so much. That's my rant.
See, well, I see your rant, but for me, I think I watch Man of Steel the way you watch Superman the movie.
So weird to me.
For me, I was like, oh, first of all, as a kid, I'm like, Superman can't go, spinning the world backwards isn't going to make time go back. And
it's a visual metaphor.
If he says, doesn't really work, but that's fine. Yeah. It's better than the shield that he throws off or the magic finger that Zod has.
Yes.
But if he's going to say, fuck it, Dad, I'm going to interfere with human history and we're going to play the moment, all my powers, and I couldn't save him, why doesn't he fly backwards a little bit further and go back and have an EMT there and save his father?
Because he doesn't need his. I mean, and again, I would say, but again, you want to talk about myth, Mark. You want to talk about myth, and you want to talk about this, these big, grand sort of mythic traditions. Discarding your parents, which is going to sound callous, but I mean that is such an important part of these mythic traditions. This idea of I cannot be a fully realized person unless I move beyond my own childhood.
Yeah, I agree with that. But also, I think that's also in this scene with Kevin Costner in the tornado. Instead of my powers, I couldn't save him. Clark was doing what his father told him, and he realizes he could have and should have saved his father. Be damned what the personal cost was. And that's exactly what he does at the end when he kills Zod. He kills Zod because he has no choice, because truthfully, you can argue this, but I will die on the hill. The Phantom Zone he has no access to it. This guy is going to destroy the planet. He has no choice. He has used the pepper spray. He has used the taser. He has used the beanbag gun. He's used the negotiator. He's going to have to shoot this guy. That's the same sort of bookending thing that you're saying happens in Superman.
I think it's
the movie.
I think it's different in Man of Steel because the argument.
It's different in Man of Steel because they're on the ground looking up, whereas the Superman movie is from the sky looking down.
Sure, but I also think that there's a difference. Like his father's whole point was, even if you believe it in your whole heart, don't reveal yourself to the world because they'll hate you for it, right? And he literally, I mean, he explicitly says that to Lois Lane. That's the context in which that tornado scene sits.
Yes, and we talked about on the tape that was ruined. My biggest problem with that, I could fix that. They should not have had Henry Cavill in the back of that truck playing a 17-year-old.
It's really bad.
They should have had the kid, because if you had an actual 17-year-old, I'm sorry, you might disagree with your parents, but if you're a farm kid and you're raised in that part of the world, and your dad tells you something to do, you do it no matter what, because you are raised. So that, to me, the moment when Kim Costner says that, to me is so heartbreaking. I think it does suffer because you have a 30-year-old buff guy over there. If you had a kid, that there would be no issue with that moment.
Yeah. There's definitely when I rewatched it again, it does stick out as just like, dude, Henry Cavill, you are a grown ass man. You should be able to make your own decision at that point.
That wig doesn't make you look 17.
No, even the conversation in the car ride was he's being so petulant, and you're like, you are an adult human being. Like, what is
like,
this?
shouldn't you be kicked out of the house by this age
Seriously.
anyway? Okay, so we gotta wrap it up here. But one last thing I do want to talk about real quick, because I know both of you are probably going to disagree with me on this. Because Marc, you've already said that John Williams, that piece of music is more than just a score for that movie. That is your national anthem in a sense. I think that the theme that plays at the very end of this movie on the soundtrack, the title is What Are You Going to Do When You're Not Saving the World? It's kind of this new rendition of the Superman theme. They actually played it in the second trailer. I personally think that is not just the best Superman theme. I think it's the best superhero theme music, and it breaks my heart that it's never fully played, A, within the movie, or B, within any of the sequels. The only time we hear it in its full triumphant glory is at the end credits of this movie, but it is so good.
That's how I feel about John Ottman using the John Williams stuff in Superman Returns. There are a couple of tracks. The track when Superman lands on the roof and flies with Lois, that track is evocative of "Can You Read My Mind?" and it's orchestral, and it's lush, and it's romantic, and it's beautiful. So yeah, I wish we had more composers of the old school working in movies writing themes, because as much as I love Hans Zimmer and the Junkie XL stuff, those are sound bites. There's not a hummable piece of music in that, and I think it's why Michael Giacchino is so good, in the sense of he brings the Danny Elfman energy, but he writes scores. He writes scores that I want to listen to without watching the movie. And I hope that whenever we get another Superman movie, that they do keep some of that DNA of that John Williams theme in it, because I think that's just as important to Superman as red trunks and a cape.
See, that's where I disagree, because I just think that we're never going to get past that Superman aesthetic of the Richard Donner one without just leaving that theme where it is. It actually really bothered me. I really like Justice League, the cut that we did end up getting. I think it's cartoony and kind of fun. But the one thing that stuck in my craw was the reuse of that theme, and also Danny Elfman's Batman theme. Those just need to be retired to the franchises that they belong to. And I really liked the theme that they came up with this one. I just don't know why they didn't commit harder to it. At the end of Justice League, when he finally rips open the shirt and he's going to fly away, that theme should have blared from every speaker in the theater, and it didn't, and it breaks my heart.
We're also dealing with a corporation that does, corporations don't know how to make art. So imagine the Justice League movie we would have seen if they said, hey, you know what, we're bumping the release date back till April.
Well, then they wouldn't have gotten their bonuses. So.
I know, but they all got fired now anyway. Right. I mean, can you imagine if people had children the way movie studios make movies? You're like, oh, we need a movie for July 4th. Let's have one. Oh, I want to have a baby in February. Let's have it. That's not the way it works.
Clearly, you are not married to my wife, Marc. That is exactly how my future daughter was conceived. It was like, well, I need to hit this timeline. Let's go.
I like her style. I like that strategic mind. I like her style.
Yes, it's very much in your vein, Bill.
Does she work? Did she work at Fox? That's how they made those Fantastic Four movies.
Can I make a quick observation on the music, Billy? Because I half see what you're saying. And there are parts of the Hans Zimmer score that I think are just transcendent, but I also agree with Marc. Like,
I own the Hans Zimmer scores, but as far as like satisfying. Yeah. I'm going to go to the Hollywood Bowl and watch an orchestra play this. I want to go to the John Williams score, not the Junkie XL.
And by the way, that John Williams score too, the secondary themes, the lowest theme, I think, is one of the most beautiful pieces of romantic music ever written for a movie.
Can you read my mind? Are you kidding me?
Oh my God. But here's the thing that's interesting. My favorite part of the Hans Zimmer score was that 3-note progression he used for like the tentative steps of being Superman. That dun, da, dun, that it comes in so delicately throughout. I love that so much.
Yeah.
I think that is such a great theme for early Superman because there's something interesting. It's almost an exact inversion of dun 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 dun, like the ramp up to the big note. That idea of like the long held note with the two delicate dun da da versus dun da da da. It's almost like you're working your way up to the traditional Superman theme. I wish they would have done more of that in the score. I hear you. I think that score was fine. That Superman theme that he finally wrote at the end. I don't think it has the storytelling capability. I don't think it has the storytelling capabilities of the John Williams music.
Agree to disagree, but I knew that was going to be one where where it was finally you two would align on something. Sometimes you just got to be the lunch lady that every kid hates to get them to all stop
hair
fighting.
in my tater tots.
That's what I was doing through the rest of this episode. So I'm glad that you could take some of that onus.
So guys, yeah, look, Man of Steel, it's not perfect, but it truly was the Superman movie. That was the most excited I was at the theater for quite a while at that point. I too am in the same boat that I hope Henry Cavill gets one more shot at it. But
how great would it be to see him in a Shazam movie?
I was so bummed.
I want to see Cavill's Superman with Zach Levi's Shazam, even though Zach Levi's Shazam is 6 or 7 years younger than Billy Batson. He plays him a little young.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily 15, but just because I think we need that. I think that's what they're going to do too. I think Superman's going to show up in Shazam 2 and mentor this kid a little. I think that's what's going to happen.
That's the movie I really want to see.
And then you'll have the three of them in a Black Adam movie.
Fine with me. I was so heartbroken when I saw that cape and those boots. I was like, oh my God, yes. And then it cut. I was like, no. The roller coaster.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see, because if the Snyder is good and people respond to it, who knows what DC will do with their films? Maybe because we're keeping Gal, we're keeping Jason. Who knows where? I'm actually very excited because I feel like I'm in a choose your own adventure book, and every chapter is a different language. I have no idea where it's going next.
I don't think they do. Who knows? It's DC. That's the thing too. It's like anytime that you talk about DC movies, and we'll use this as kind of final thoughts here, but anytime that you talk about DC movies, it turns into, well, you're a Marvel shill or this and that. It's like, I want people to know that I grew up with DC comics. I didn't fall in love with Marvel until much, much later. I grew up DC. I want all of these movies to be awesome. And it breaks my heart when I don't connect with some of them, and I'm glad that other people do. And I think that's okay. I think, we've learned here today that not only do these movies speak differently to different people, but we bring our own interpretations of what these characters are to it. So you're not always going to have the same reaction to these movies. And when you get something like a Batman Begins or a Dark Knight that tends to hit pretty universally, those are special moments. But for a lot of these superhero movies, we bring a lot of our own baggage into it, and it's okay if you don't like them all.
Well, I think possibly the best thing that happened to DC's superhero movies was the failure of Justice League commercially, because I would rather have these movies exist on their own and have the characters pop into each other. But what Kevin Feige did with Marvel Studios will never happen again.
Shouldn't be even trying it. Couldn't agree more.
And love the Marvel movies or hate the Marvel movies, Kevin Feige is, in addition to being legitimately a nice dude, I've known Kevin for 20 years, and he's gotten nicer with his success. He has, if anything, but he's the most successful Hollywood producer of all time. He's had 24 movies now that have all way overperformed. So let's stop chasing that. That exists. I don't want movies that are going to be mimicking Marvel. I loved, like in Suicide Squad, when Ben Affleck's Batman shows up, but it's not a Batman sequel. Ironically, that's the way Marvel used to do their crossovers in comic books. They were never big events. You would just have Spider-Man swing by, go, oh, look, there's Doctor Strange grilling on the roof. I like that sort of shared universe, because for me, one of the issues I personally have with the Marvel movies is I don't really feel they're movies. I feel it's a TV show that I go see episodes in a theater, because, and that's not an insult, but they're not. you watch Empire Strikes Back, you can watch Empire Strikes Back out of context, and it's an enjoyable movie. There's going to be stuff you don't know, but it works as a full meal. A lot of times for me, it feels the Marvel movies feel like, oh, you like this one? The next one's going to be even better. And I'm like, well, I'm here now.
Yeah.
And that's, once again, just a personal thing. But I do like the idea that the DC movies make these different movies on their own and let them cross over if you want to. Don't try and make that universe, because it's a fool's errand, because I don't think Kevin would have that success a second time. That was a perfect storm of talent and audience and zeitgeist and trust in him that I think chasing that makes no sense, because it's a singular vision, and I don't think that exists in the Warner Brothers film department. So I think that we should just make good individual movies and have the characters meet for coffee afterwards.
I'm all about that. Gentlemen, I have to say, I know maybe some people were bummed that they didn't get to hear the first recording. I had just as good of a time, if not a better time, the second time around.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah, this one's probably better.
This one's better.
So
because we did this before, I think me and Bill are less tentative with each other, because now we know each other. We can be a little bit more, emotional about things, because we're no longer just two strangers on a weird podcast. We're buddies who have a shared love of this stuff.
There you go.
I think we're all we all love this stuff. Look, if you're listening to this podcast right now, I know you probably love this stuff too, and I want to thank all of you for making season 3 so great. I think it's no secret at this point that yes, this is the finale of season 3, because I'm about to be a dad in just a couple of weeks here, and I don't know when season 4 will be hitting. I truly don't know what to expect. So this might turn into kind of a Curb Your Enthusiasm thing, where when it comes back. But you know what? Just looking back at everyone I've been able to talk to, all the different opinions I've got to share, the amazing conversations that I've had, not just with my guests who are really, let me call it what it is, not just with my friends, but with you guys too. It's been really amazing during some of these really tough times. Marc, do you have anything going on that we can plug, that we can talk about real fast?
No, I mean, I have stuff going on, but you know how it is in both comics and Hollywood. Until everyone thinks that they're government secrets and it's all NDAs and nonsense. So there's potentially really, really cool stuff. I will let you know when the checks clear and when we're on set. But that being said, I can't complain too much. But I have some comic book stuff coming up. I have a pretty big creator-owned project that I'll be announcing fairly soon that I've been wanting to do for 30 years now. So yeah,
nice.
I'm around.
Follow Twitter. Is it just at Marc Andreyko?
It's at Marc Andreyko. I think I'm real Marc Andreyko on Instagram, and I will actually post something. There's a picture. I have one picture there, but I will go there. And then on Facebook.
Fantastic.
So,
and Bill,
register to vote.
Please register to vote. If you take anything away from this conversation, register to vote. Bill, you and I, we are part of the Reboot It show. We had our season finale for that show, but we are now starting the Reboot It Rewinds, where we're going back to our old episodes with some hindsight, taking user questions, starting with The Matrix, and we'll be doing every other episode. Excited to do that with you. What else you guys got going on? We talked about the Kickstarter, Nerd Goat.
Yeah, so the TV stuff I'm doing, I don't need to plug, nor do I want to. So I'll plug the internet stuff, which is, Nerd Goat Podcast. You can find it on any podcatcher. It is a deep dive into everybody's favorite characters. We're getting back to the interview format, which we're very excited about. And we have our big Tournament of Goats, our season ender, coming up on June 22nd, where we talk about the results of our bracket, which is going on now. If you missed March Madness, because it didn't happen this year, we've got a March Madness style bracket for you at nerdgoatpodcast.com with all of the characters that we covered in season 3 of our show. So you can get on there and vote.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
So if once a character is chosen by someone, they're off the table. You can't
just if we go by seasons. And so, yeah, full disclosure, we've been talking to Marc about being on the show, and Marc, you'd be in season 4. So it's open. Whoever you want to do, you can do.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll talk about it off the air. But
I love it. Billy Business making business deals happen
boom.
On the air. I love it.
Living up to your name.
Guys, Thank you so much for being a part of the show today. Thank you for being a part of season 3, and all the other seasons are available now on iTunes, Spotify, all that kind of fun stuff. Please be safe. COVID is still a thing. I know things are reopening, but be safe, be smart. Thank you so much. I love you all, and I will see you in season 4.